Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you to the pitch speakers for really getting us straight into the topic that will also keep us busy in this midday plenary. In fact, while I want to introduce the midday plenary, I'd already like to ask the panelists please to come up to the stage and take their seats here. In the midday plenary today, we really want to pick up, not just from the pitch speakers, please do come here, come along, not just from the pitch speakers, but also to build upon what was done in the morning plenary. I think we had some very interesting insights emerging in the morning plenary. Just to pick on a few highlights. We heard, of course, that land use and forestry present the largest untapped potential for climate action. At the same time, the percentage of finance, both public and private finance, that goes into land use and forestry is in the single-digit percentages. So that means we have a mismatch and much more needs to be done. We also know that really the funds should be there. We're in an era of low cost of capital when it comes to private funds. Also, we heard that, of course, when we look at the amount of public funds that are going into some of the unsustainable subsidies, if we could redirect those would more than make up for the types of public investments that we need to really achieve change at scale. We also have joint commitments that are made between the public, private sectors and civil society. We have the SDGs, we have the Paris commitments, New York Declaration of Forests, Consumer Goods Forum. There are many different commitments and they all go in the right direction. And yet more needs to be done. We've heard this morning that policy change and the identification of bankable projects needs to go hand in hand. And what we need to do is we need to address a number of challenges. And some of those that were highlighted this morning was the challenge of risk management. Also, making sure that as we drive for scale and as we drive for commercial investments, we do not lose sight of and don't lose the impacts in terms of the social and environmental impacts that we really strive for in our broader sustainable commitments. We also heard that it's not just enough to say we want to finance the end game. We need to finance the transition. And this is a key challenge when we look at change in the landscape. So without further ado, I would therefore like to join my panel and introduce them to you. Let me just come over here. Thank you. So I have a distinguished panel with a range of different backgrounds and different roles that together are already and can make a difference in taking us forward in meeting some of these challenges. What we want to do in this panel is now to really look beyond what are the factors, etc., but look also at existing good practices that can be scaled up. What do we know? What do we still need to do in order to make things happen at scale? Pedro has already been introduced, so I want to welcome you again, of course, as the manager of Sustainable Investment Management. Mariam Khil, who is on my left, is the Director of Sustainable Financing at Crédit Agricole of Maroc. She's in charge of the design of innovative financing products and promotes sustainable development projects. And she's also in charge of the setting up of the environmental and social management system. Crédit Agricole du Maroc, of course, is a company that also finances smallholders where many others are not, the smallholders that are excluded from many other financing mechanisms. And the portfolio of Crédit Agricole, in fact, has more than half of its portfolio earmarked to the agricultural, agribusiness, and the rural sectors. So welcome. Dorothee Hall, who's on her left. Dorothee is the manager of Oceans and Climate Change at the Global Marine and Polar Program at IUCN. And in this, she also manages the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility. Welcome, Dorothee. Antoine Cyr, welcome. Antoine is the Director of Company Engagement at BNP Paribas. And in this, he is also the Chief of Sustainability, which includes taking care of sustainable business and CSR for the company, and also leading culture change in the bank. In fact, Antoine was principally responsible also for creating the new brand of BNP Paribas following the merger, taking up more a broader international outlook and also broadening social commitments. And last but not least, we have with us Gauthier Kiru, who's the director of the LDN Fund in Mirova. In this, he is in charge of the business development and the overall coordination of fund creation. He manages the investment opportunities, sourcing and analysis, and also acts as the focal point with United Nations and other stakeholders. Please give a round of applause to the panel. Yeah, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's easier. Oops, sorry. But I just... Thank you. Thank you, Pedro. So maybe to start things, as I said, we have a very diverse panel, so I want to take a first chance to hear from all of the panelists and to really bring their diverse perspectives to this challenge of what is it that we can scale up, what exists, what can we scale up. So Gauthier, if I could start with you. The LDN Fund, of course, is a public-private partnership. It has commercial objectives, a commercial mission, but it's also explicitly tied to sustainable development objectives. It's about reaching scale, and it's about reaching impact. Let us hear a little bit how it's going with this mission, what is happening. Are you rapidly reaching scale, and what still needs to be done to move on? What can we learn from your experience?
Yeah, thank you very much, and hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to share views on this experience of the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund. And the news are positive. There are good news. It's very encouraging. I think it has taken time to get there, because we started 4 years ago with the UN selecting Mirova as a fund manager to establish a fund that would contribute to financing the fight against land degradation. 4 years ago, it was still very nascent ideas, concepts. Even the Global Landscape Forum existed, but we were not so crowded rooms by then. I think the momentum is very positive. The fund is now fully operational. We have been able to put together more than $150 million out of our 300 million target, which we're hoping to reach in the course of next year. And this has been possible with this public partnership you mentioned. Of course, the European Investment Bank has been a very early supporter in the design phase and has really helped us refine the model of the fund. And I can see, of course, Martin in the room and Chris Knowles, who played a very important role. Thank you again, Chris, for your support. And also the government of Luxembourg. Minister Dijsborg was in the beginning also a supporter of this fund. And this public support allowed us to bring more private investors, and I'm also very grateful to BNP, with BNP Cardiff as a insurance company, for instance, mainstream insurance company, being able to allocate significant capital in this fund, as well as in another fund managed by Mirova Australia, which is the Sustainable Ocean Fund. And recently, for instance, amongst other, we announced the investment from Allianz Group, which is, I would say, mainstream insurance company in Europe. That is also, I think, sending very positive signal. And this is possible also by partnering with IDH, for instance, who is managing the technical assistance facility of the fund, working also with civil society. We have a partnership with WWF, with also local partners, Crédit Agricole du Maroc also, for instance. So yes, it's about coalitions, and this is what makes things possible and scalable. But maybe two main ideas to not to take too much time, but why we should really be optimistic, but what needs to be done. First, why we should be optimistic is that really we're looking at more than 200 investment opportunities. The technical solutions are there. It's not about reinventing the wheel. Agroforestry, agroecology, regenerative agriculture, sustainable afforestation. There are good techniques, good knowledge, good know-how, and even technical track record that can allow us to go through an investment committee. Second, we see also increasing market demand for sustainably produce good food fiber, and there is really a shift in the market for more sustainable production that integrates protection, inclusion. So all this landscape approach and materialized sometimes in certified commodities, for instance, is also gaining momentum and demand. So it's also very encouraging from a business standpoint. And last but not least, there are very good entrepreneurs that are developing meaningful business models. And our mission is really to scale up, but also to support, above all, these entrepreneurs, green entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs that become real and robust companies that can scale up the asset class. We need finance, but we need real economy, and it takes private sector operators to become robust. Now, what we need to do more to I would say, accelerate this positive momentum. I think first, we hear a lot of blended finance. We need to have really an efficient use of public money, of taxpayer money, only where it's needed and for a transition phase. The objective is not to, I would say, compensate the imperfection or the too high risk in itself by public money, is rather to compensate the high-risk perception to help the decision to be made to move forward. But as long as we will have a track record built, this public money is not supposed to be needed anymore. And this is the way we should use it in an efficient way. And this requires also, I think, a more robust asset class and sector where there's a more clear division of work with a value chains of actors, fund managers, but also consultants helping structure the transaction, doing the right due diligence, lawyers, operators on the ground, independent verifiers. We need really a sector made of different operators to better be mapped and coordinated. And finally, what is my last point? Yeah, standardization. I think in order to reduce transaction costs, but also ensure strong integrity, we need to better standardize, of course, the environmental and social aspects. We need to avoid risk and make sure we generate impact. And in this regard, UNEP is playing also a leading role. There was a very important workshop in Cambridge recently. And also in terms of structures, we need to also standardize the investment structure. And we have recently technical assistance facility of the LDN fund, IDH, published example of structure that can put in place, and sharing views in this type of forum to build a real asset class is also very important. So here are the main messages I would like to share.
Thank you very much, Gauthier. Thank you. I would like to turn to Mariam to share with us the experience of moving finance to smallholders. Because it's interesting, normally we talk about moving to action at scale, yet when we're in the landscape, when we're in developing countries especially, the people who really manage the land, who work the land, they're often very small-scale producers. So for them to transform into sustainable production approaches, they face many challenges, and we heard even just now in the pitch speech, tenure, information, knowledge, organization, many challenges, but finance, access to finance is a critical one. And many banks consider these small producers unbankable. But I think at Crédit Agricole Maroc, you disagree. You work with these small producers, and we would be very interested to hear from you how you manage to reach and serve those clients, and what we can learn, what still needs to be done, both to scale up in Morocco, but also in other countries.
Thank you. Yes, I think my perspective will be a perspective of a local bank and African bank. So from our point of view, the main challenge when we're talking about land use and financing sustainable land use is about, first, financial inclusion. How do we make sure that we can reach the final beneficiaries that we're talking about, and who are most of them smallholder farmers? So in Morocco, more than 40% of our farmers are small-scale farmers that we consider as non-bankable traditionally, because they're excluded from traditional financing because they have no collateral. So that also refers to the land tenure, obviously. In Africa, this number is rather 80% of African countries that are non-bankable. So what we have tried to do in Morocco is to find a way, a mechanism to make sure that we can address them and we can bring the financing to them. And we've created an institution called Tamwil Fillah, specifically dedicated to them, and that finances them without collateral. And with the track record of almost 10 years, we have proven that they can be financed and still the institution is sustainable and the institution can still provide more and more financing to other farmers. So up to now in Morocco, we are financing almost 35% of the Moroccan farmers, whereas in Africa, we're talking more about 6% only of the African farmers who get access to financing and to loans. So this is very important in my view, because once we get these mechanisms in place, then we have to make sure, and we can make sure that the project we're financing do include all the parameters and all the criteria that make them sustainable in the long term. So to give an example, I will talk about the palm tree financing. In Morocco, which is a semi-arid country, we have oases, and in this oasis we have palm trees, and most of those oases are smallholder farmers that plant those trees. So if you want to finance them, these projects are very interesting from a sustainable point of view because they are acting as rampart against the desert. The oases provide biodiversity, they offer work opportunities in areas where there is scarce opportunities. And so you want to finance them, but you have to find the vehicle to bring the financing to those smallholder farmers, and this is where Tamwil Fillah is interesting. And it works also with the traditional banking system, as Crédit Agricole du Maroc, in order also to help those farmers improve the value added along the value chain, so they can also gather within cooperatives and then improve their value. And once you have this vehicle in place, you can now think about the exact financing that they need. So that would be a long-term, for example, for date palms, you need a long-term financing. These trees start to fruit after 6 years, so you have to think about the grace period that you include in your financing package, and you also have to think about how those farmers are going to live during these 6 years. So intercropping, maybe some kind of other activities that you can finance in order for them to live during this period. But this is something that you have to do with all the crops that you finance, adapt the financing to the exact needs of the farmers. And this is something where Crédit Agricole has developed quite a good track record and experience. And this is why we are now partnering with many African banks, so that we can share this experience and hopefully contribute to mainstreaming the landscape use and the land use financing. One message that I would like to say or to share is that we're talking about large-scale projects, but at the end, the project that we're financing are project-based and individual-based. So you need the tools to be able to finance each one of those projects or each one of these farmers. And you don't want to increase too much your transaction costs. So you need some tools that are efficient, that are transparent, so that you can report, and you have to do a good monitoring, etc. So you need to rely also on the local expertise and local banks, so that the donors that are behind you, the international donors that are talking millions or billions, can channel the funds to the final beneficiaries.
Thank you very much, Mariam. Thank you for sharing these insights on working with small scale, but trying to drive it into higher scale. And I want to flip it now, staying in the banking sector, but bringing in Antoine as a representative of a very large bank that looks at finance at the global scale and is, of course, looking at large-scale deals. Of course, BNP Paribas calls itself the bank for a changing world. You're a leading global financial services firm, and you invest in many sectors. This is not your specialty area as such. So where do you see the opportunities for investing at scale in sustainable land use? And how is BNP Paribas consolidating its position there?
Well, first of all, what we try to do two things. We try to do a bank we are able to explain to our children. And we try to seize all the opportunities of the transitions that are coming. So it's first about being able to really contribute to the future. It's you know, it's the purpose of a bank. If Crédit Agricole du Maroc exists, it's because it has brought solutions to help farmers in Morocco to do their jobs. So and it was instrumental in the society. So some banks did lose the sense of purpose, but we really believe that a bank that has no purpose has no future. So at BNP Paribas, we are mainly in our history a bank for industry. We are currently the largest bank in Europe for industry. And at one moment, we decided to have a journey to sustainability. And of course, it started with industrial issues, with taking commitments for reducing our financing of hydrocarbons, on developing renewable energy. And at one moment, we say, okay, if we want to implement a real change in the company, we need to put the 17 SDGs in our corporate purpose. And each time our journey goes further, we discover that climate issues and land issues and agriculture issues are extremely intricate. And more we see that the fields where we have to experiment if we want to have real contributions are fields that are linked to agriculture. So, and finally, it's about, for a large bank, to be able to rediscover a part of the real life that has been forgotten. And that has been forgotten by economists as well, because we have heard for long that finally agriculture was only 10% or so of the GDP of the developed countries. But at the end of the day, everybody relies on agriculture. So it's not 10% of the GDP. It's part of the life of everybody. So we have to be able to both to use our balance sheet and both to use our capacity to bring private capital, to bring it on agriculture and to land capital projects. So what can we do? Obviously, we can work through people. So, for example, working through people can mean doing, for example, smart microfinance. We have been refinancing a lot of microfinance around the world. We are now working on UNEP in creating the condition to make this microfinance to be smart for climate, to be smart for climate adaptation, and we are working in the MEBA project, which is a project that aims to do so. We can work for making smallholders work more climate friendly and more friendly to land capital through corporates. For example, with Neumann Cafe, which is a global leader in sustainable coffee, we created a facility to finance and to de-risk the fact that smallholders develop much more sustainable practices in the way they produce coffee. So you can do this through such empowerment directly of smallholders. Other things is that sometimes you can rediscover corporates, companies that have completely outside of the radar of large banks and that deserve to be helped by large banks. For example, in Senegal, we signed an agreement with UN Women, and this allowed us to discover that there were women that had developed incredible industry, rice industry, resilient agriculture in Senegal. They had developed large corporates, and those ones were completely outside of the radar of the banks. And how did we do that? How did we rediscover? Because those women have developed agriculture in areas where the men have left. They wanted to save our villages. They developed resilient agriculture. And suddenly, when the men discover that it is working, they come back and tell to the chief of villages, please don't give the right on the land to women because we are the men and we deserve it. And then with UN Women, we are helping those women to upgrade their cooperative, to make it a real large corporate where the CEO is a woman, where the CFO is a woman, and where the technical people are women, because you have all these women, and it completely changes the story. And honestly, if you knew the CEO of this company, she is really coming from the land. She learned by herself, and she is now a great company manager. And we need to be able to find those people, to have programs to empower them. And finally, of course, we need to bring private capital to projects, to investment vehicles. We need to be in such funds as Myrova funds, but we also need to create assets. And for example, in Indonesia, we are on a blended finance project, which is called the TLFF, Tropical Landscape Financing Facility. It's around a rubber plantation, 88,000 hectares rubber plantation, that is currently giving jobs to 16,000 people, contributing to restore biodiversity, and providing sustainable rubber to Michelin, who did commit to buy the production. And because it's a virtuous circle of economy, we were also able to find investors and also to find de-risking through multilateral banks. So this is all the different tools that can be used and that we try to use. In some areas we are still experimenting, but we are really very enthusiastic in going further and in developing blended finance in this area with local banks, with funds, with corporates, with everybody.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for sharing these experiences. Maybe, Pedro, you can pick up from this, because we've heard a number of examples that Antoine has shared in terms of things that can be scaled up. Of course, in your pitch, you were pitching us to bring more finance really onto the ground to scale up through blended finance mechanisms, through different models. What are some of the things that you see in your portfolio or on the ground that you see is ready to go to scale?
Yeah, or even before that, what are the barriers that we face in terms of bringing it to scale? And I noticed that my slides are finally there, so if they could be there. Sorry for the small delay, but I could use that to illustrate what are the challenges and how we're going about it. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges of any of these initiatives that we see out there at the moment, of kind of big pledges of hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to sustainable agriculture, sustainable land use, one of the big challenges is really distributive capacity, absorptive capacity. I mean, you may have a big fund, but you really need to get to the ground, and it's a challenge. I mean, which both Antoine and Gauthier referred to, and the way that we are addressing it is basically trying to identify what we call aggregators, and those aggregators are not necessarily NGOs or project developers, but they are actual players that are out there. Is the agricultural input provider, the local bank, the large agricultural cooperatives, the commodities traders. If you can actually engage them in selecting the individual farmers, to help with the credit screening of each of them, and actually conveying the message apart from being the conveyor of the financial resources. You're changing not only the farmers, but you also changing the other parties, the next level, the people that actually have relationships with thousands and thousands of farmers. So this is one challenge, and that's how I see people kind of overcoming that. The second one is really about risk. I mean, you know, many of you refer to the risks of smallholders, and perhaps we can have the second one. Yeah, there we are. And you do need to address the question of risk, and there is where the blending, I mean, we can do that in different ways. I mean, the way that we are doing that is through an asset-backed security structure in which you have pools of individual farmers and loans or investments, which then go into a vehicle that is then tranched. It's tranched between a first loss tranche, which we ask actually the aggregators to subscribe to, but the main and most important one is to try to blend some second loss in the mezzanine tranche. The mezzanine tranche is the kind of thing that I will be, you know, talking to multilateral banks, to sovereign wealth funds, and so on, to take that layer. So the combination of a first loss and a second loss, we have a senior tranche which is so protected with this subordinated capital that you can then go to normal institutional investors, fixed income investors, and really harness as much private sector capital as possible. So those are ways that we are seeing other you know, people talking about similar things, but to address the issue of absorptive capacity, de-risking. So by de-risking, you have a low cost of capital that can be competitive for those farmers in the ground that need to change their practices.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Dorothy, so far we focused and stepped so firmly on land. What if we change our glance and look towards the sea? We know about the importance of blue carbon and coastal landscapes. We know about the importance, for instance, of mangroves in storing carbon, but also in enhancing resilience, for instance, protecting against tropical storms. And yet, investments in this area, and in some cases even more difficult than on some of the landscapes on terrestrial grounds. So what can you tell us about the bankable projects in the area of coastal conservation and restoration? What is there, what can be moved up to scale, and what can we learn from your experience in the facility?
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, to having the blue space here within the broader green discussions. I think from the perspective of ISN and myself, why we got into this is that we saw there is a niche and an opportunity to really channel private finance, as you say, into this coastal area. And while there are more and more sort of funds itself coming alive, we do feel there is a need to really develop a solid project pipeline. And obviously, as ICN, we are no fund manager, but what we can bring is the conservation expertise and actually walk the talk in terms of where do we find these bankable nature-based solutions projects. So basically, what we're trying to do is showing, as we've heard from those who were here yesterday, that there is this strong economic value, both in terms of coastal and marine ecosystems, and how do we turn them into solid financial cash flows. And I think, again, as in terms of IUCN's role, what we are trying to do with the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, and again, my thanks to the government of Luxembourg, who's supporting us in this endeavor, is to provide both technical and funding assistance to create this, this pipeline while not making compromise on the conservation of nature, biodiversity, and in this case, particularly also the positive impacts on climate change adaptation and mitigation. So what we've seen in terms of the project pipeline, it's been difficult and a steep learning curve. So I think I'm standing here also to say that more needs to be done. We certainly see opportunities primarily around the natural resource management, so aquaculture, fisheries, where we see the opportunity to combine it with mangrove reforestation, for example, and linking it to carbon credits. The demand for that, at least on my personal experiences, is growing exponentially at the moment, where I don't know at the moment where to to send interested buyers to, quite frankly. So there is a need also to help really produce strong projects from the ground up that have social environmental integrity, and definitely also now with the Blue COPs happening next week or starting next week, I think we are more to see on that respect. I think another piece that we see very interesting opportunities is around infrastructure and sort of also renewable energy space, which is more sort of the traditional investment opportunities when it comes to climate change, yet how we can link those to conservation benefits. So I think we haven't thought about too much yet how we can use some of that investments in actually promoting marine protected areas, for example, within the fisheries community, while definitely more challenging. But how can we bring this together if we really want to have the conservation, nature-based solutions and biodiversity impact? And then a third set of projects that we see are more around how we can help easing the flow of private finance basically into conservation around fintech or some of these sort of blockchain type projects coming forward. That is certainly still one of the smaller group we are looking at, but again it's a very exciting space to be in. It's growing, that the interest overall is growing a lot, but I think we need to really bringing together the different partners again, from the conservation side, from the banking, the investment side, in really making sure that these projects have the actual impacts that they claim they should have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothee. We have, of course, I think we've had a very interesting round of perspectives from different players in the finance community and in the partnership community in terms of getting projects and identified and ensuring they're sustainable. One thing that would be very interesting to hear from you is, of course, you meet on this panel. This is probably not the first time you've sat on panels with people from representatives from other partners. But this has been now a journey already, not just in the Global Landscape Forum, but also in many other fora. How has this changed the way that you work in your own individual institutions? The engagement with other partners, what have you learned? How do you engage off-panel with each other in a way that's different before you were thinking about landscape finance? And how are you changing your own business models to make it easier to partner and bring this action to scale? Who would like to start? Please go ahead, Antoine. Thank you.
But I'm very talkative, so I want to be short this time. Yeah. No, but basically it makes us open the gates and discuss with people we would never have discussed before. We say that cooperation is a new competition. Now we are working with UN agencies. We are working much closer to multilateral banks. We are doing partnerships with local banks. We are doing partnerships with asset managers that belong to banks that are competitors. So we are working with startups. We are working. So it's for us. It's a complete change, and I must say that for our employees, it's a very refreshing change. It's very challenging because it's easier to do the thing you have been doing for the last 20 years and to do it again. But in terms of enthusiasm, it's a real good change.
Yeah, very, very positive momentum. And I mentioned the fact that coalitions are needed, and it takes to speak the same language, to understand the challenges together and really build mutual trust. And I think another important aspect is not only this collaboration, but it's also hiring people from the conservation world in banks, or people from banks going into conservation organization or in the field of agriculture. It's about also people moving from these different areas, and it's very interesting to see this happening. I think a few years ago, people from conservation NGOs would have refused to work in banks, and I would have tend to agree sometimes. But it's changing, because really banks are now really considering these topics very seriously, and we need strong integrity, and this is part of the game changer. And just also to speak slightly on a related topic is that Antoine mentioned that this project in Senegal, right, was not in the radar, but because they were not the right people to look at it and the right lens to analyze it. And we hear a lot that, oh, there are not enough pipeline, not enough project. But I think there is also not enough people able to see them, understand them, and assess them in a correct way. So it's also a virtuous cycle. There are many projects. It's just that we need to hire the right people also to analyze them. And there is a systemic change happening and cross-fertilization also. Thank you.
I very much agree with what has been said. And I would say also that it helps actually to build the narrative, because the narrative is what makes us change. As humans, we need to believe in something, in an idea, and then to make it real and use the technical skills that we all have. And this sharing and the meetings, talking with different people, really helps us build this common narrative saying that, yes, it is possible and that together we will make it. So it is very helpful actually to talk with this diversity of people.
Well, we are all agreeing here, and I'll continue to agree. But no, it's really. I mean, if we are all aiming at kind of transformation of a sector, I mean, it's not all about finance. It's not all about technical skills. It's really you really need a whole ecosystem of complementary skill sets that have to talk to each other. And I think that was Gauthier that mentioned that, you know, this cross-pollination of environmentalists going to the bank and vice versa. And that's really important, because one of the biggest problems that we used to see a lot in the past is that people talk different languages, and you need to have people that are good at translating finance into conservation, conservation into finance, and then bring kind of the technical skills and you know, social and climate components all together, because that requires all these skill sets.
Yeah, I can only echo that and agree that the work that we're doing with the BNCFF would not be possible with my conservation background alone, but actually having finance experts in the team that basically sometimes talk a different language, so it's even internally quite interesting to make sure we're on the same page. And I think what I would add here is sort of the connection also between the green and the blue space. They obviously have very, you know, particular characteristics, but I think to some degree the blue space is lagging behind the green sometime, but learning from experiences and really having also the opportunity in fora like this one to really talk about some of the, let's say, other lands or / seascapes to learn from and actually build upon.
Thank you very much. I'm looking to the Master of Ceremony to understand whether we can draw a couple, we can extend a little bit and take a couple of questions, or we should close here. We can? Okay, great. In that case, I'd like to just invite a question from the audience, just a couple, because we're running late. We have one question over here.
Thank you. My question is for Pedro. So you're talking about deforestation-free certified soy, which is a great initiative. But are we still left, correct me if I'm wrong, with a macro monoculture crop that leaves us with vast stretches of land with very low biodiversity and is moreover heavily dependent on non-renewable chemical inputs? Your creative financial vehicles, how are they addressing those crucial issues? Thank you.
Let me take one more question. Is there another question? Here.
Thank you. Lee Sylvanest from UNEP Finance Initiative. Just on the recruitment front, we are looking for someone with expertise in ecosystems and finance. Closing date is 20th of February. Oh no, 20th of December, so yeah. But my question is on the blue economy. I'd like to just ask more about what sort of interest you have had from banks and mainstream financial institutions to develop this further, and how you see it going from kind of a bit niche to impact investment to mainstream. Thank you.
Thanks. Pedro, can I first turn over to you?
Sure. As it happens, I mean, soy is it's a massive monoculture responsible for whatever, 10% of Brazilian GDP, and it will continue to be a massive monoculture, mechanized agriculture with agricultural inputs. And there's nothing that I can do about it. And there's nothing that I'm trying to do about it at this point in time. The objective of what we're doing is that, and massive monocultures exist in every country, in pretty much a lot of the agricultural commodities. So we can't change the world all at once, and we're focusing on reducing the very deleterious impact that this industry is having in terms of deforestation at this point in time in Brazil. I mean, the same happens in Argentina, in Paraguay, and other places as well. So we're focusing on starting a transition from where they are going to something that is a lot less impacting. But we are not addressed, and frankly, I had a similar discussion this morning in terms of what about, you know, improving agricultural practices or making them organic or non-GMO or whatever it may be. I mean, that is the next step for possibly for other organizations to gradually drive these changes as well.
In terms of the blue economy, we certainly perceive a lot of interest generally for investment into the blue space. What we are a bit concerned about to make sure that it is a sustainable blue economy and that actually nature-based solution and conservation are part of that. And I think when we talk to various actors in the field, the general interest is, yes, this is great, you know, we would like to do it, but not really knowing how or where the projects are. And I think that's where we're trying with the BNCFF to come in and really, you know, show where is the potential for nature-based solutions and really conservation impactful project. But I say here as well that it's still very niche, it's still very early days. So we need to really bring the various actors together, and also when we talk about scale, I think some of the projects are still a bit far away from many of the numbers that I'm hearing here. So I think we can really just do is pull the various expertises and efforts together to make it grow and really on a really sustainable path.
Thank you, Pedro and Dorothee. So yeah, we've had a very rich discussion. I think it's difficult to sum up in a few words, but we certainly, the discussion from different perspectives touched upon some of the challenges that remain, but that we also already have some way of tackling. About transition, enabling the transition, about dealing with transaction costs, really making sure we have a project pipeline that is identified, that's ready, and that can be found. The projects can be found to those that are willing to invest, and needing to bring different tools to manage the risks at different scales of different stakeholders. What was also interesting, I think, was this point of the way in which cooperation is coming together, and the fact that in different institutions are learning about both the approaches, the needs, and maybe the perspectives of different players, and this enables now, through greater exchange, to come together and have more effective collaboration and really be able to tackle the problem together from different perspectives. I would really like to end this panel discussion on quoting what Antoine said. Cooperation is the new competition. I think that's a wonderful theme to leave us into the lunchtime, and to the ability for all of you to come together, exchange, and hopefully strike new opportunities for collaboration across organizations and across players. And I hope you'll join me in giving a big round of applause to the panel for their contribution.